Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. All of a sudden, we are into June, and if you have followed our coverage on an annual basis here at Lions247.com and at the Lions 24/7 podcast, you know that June is going to be a swamped month with recruiting coverage, official visit weekends, prospect camps. We're already underway with those. We were out on the field on Sunday, got a nice long look at some Penn State commits, some targets, some new offers that went out. We're going to talk about some of the camp takeaways with Daniel Gallen, who joined me on the field along with Mark Brennan and Grace Brennan a little bit later on this episode of the podcast. But official visit weekends are really going to be center stage week in and week out. And we're going to get underway here with Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting expert, on this past official visit weekend, which was the first big one for the Nittany Lions. And they are set up to have several of them here in the month of June, where they're just days away from welcoming another group of official visitors on campus. We will preview that next group in its entirety and in detail later on with our second episode this week. But things happen fast, and we don't want to look beyond what just went down in Happy Valley. So, Tyler, happy to get you back on. You've spoken with a bunch of the guys who are official visiting. Guys like Alan True, Brian Doan within our 24/7 Sports Network have also gotten feedback from several of the prospects who are here on campus. So great work out of all you. Obviously a lot for people to read going back to Sunday all the way in Tuesday here now with a bunch of quotes and notes on how the visits went. And we had a lot of directions we can go in, but I just want to begin with saying, I mean, this was a significant kickoff for the month of June.
It was, and going back to last cycle, it kind of reminded me that in the sense that there were so many top guys on campus to get things rolling right off the bat. Now, the difference between last year and this year was we didn't get any immediate commitments out of the first official visit weekend, but that kind of aligns with what we had been anticipating throughout the week. You just got the feeling that a lot of the guys who visited Penn State this past weekend, they weren't quite ready to wrap it up, no matter how well things went for them in State College. A lot of these guys still wanted to get out and make other visits. And when we dive into the specific names that were on campus, you're going to get the realization that some of these guys are still kind of new in their recruiting process, which is kind of crazy. You could say we're here in June talking about 2025 prospects who are still kind of getting to know the process and feeling things out and learning about their top suitors. It's not, typical of where we're usually at this point in the cycle with certain guys, but that happened to be the case with multiple visitors from this past weekend. And, again, just because there was no immediate success or instant gratification on the commitment front, that does not make it an unproductive weekend or an underwhelming weekend for Penn State. I view this weekend as kind of a slow burn for the Nittany Lions. I think they did a lot of good things with guys, and I think they positioned themselves for future success.
No commitments coming out of this, but we'll look long-term and see what commitments maybe do come out of this into the 2025 class as things progress and summer decisions are made. Let's begin with the pretty obvious question that I'm sure a lot of our listeners want to know. Who did Penn State specifically help itself with during the weekend? If you had to kind of gauge expectation versus reality, just moving the needle generally, where did Penn State make up some ground?
There are, I'd say, 3-4 guys that really come to mind in this regard. First, I got to start with the in-state speedster, Lex Cyrus, who's been a hot topic of conversation throughout May and leading into his official visit. He is one of Penn State's top wide receiver targets. He is a priority for Marcus Hagans and the staff. That has been the case since really last summer. This is one Penn State wants to get done. And I think it took a step towards accomplishing that during the weekend. We speculated leading up to Cyrus's visit that it was going to go beyond the weekend. He was going to make it to South Carolina for his official visit with the Gamecocks this weekend. He reiterated that to our Brian Doan that he is indeed going to be making that visit. And what came of that interview, the most interesting part of it was he's down to 2. He's down to Penn State and he's down to South Carolina. I think that Penn State has done all the right things with Cyrus up to date. I don't want to say it's inevitable because nothing is inevitable in recruitment, but this just has the feeling of one that will end in Penn State's favor. I like the Nittany Lions odds of getting this one done in the end, but I do want to see what comes of that South Carolina visit. Penn State definitely helped itself with Cyrus, though, over the weekend. Another top target I think Penn State helped itself with is Brandon Finney, the top 24/7 corner from McDonough. And, everyone listening knows about Penn State's ties to McDonough at this point. The past success recruiting at McDonough speaks for itself. Now, I wouldn't chalk this one up as some sort of foregone conclusion or auto win for Penn State because, when I led in with guys who are still feeling things out and learning a lot about the recruitment process and the schools that they're very interested in, Vinny's, that probably applies to him the most, arguably the most out of any prospect who's visiting Penn State this summer. Yeah, I talked about it last week. His blow up came later in the process. You look back at when Penn State offered, that was December. Georgia, Oregon, South Carolina, throughout January and February. So he's still, a lot of these programs are still relatively new to him. The thing with Finney, why I'm feeling so good about what Penn State accomplished with him over the weekend and why Penn State feels good about what it accomplished him over the weekend, is just the work Terry Smith has put in with him. Going back to December, that relationship has been in a really good place. The development is such an important aspect of Finney's recruitment. It's just Smith has laid out such a specific and detailed-oriented plan for him. Nothing has been left open for interpretation. There haven't been any broad generalizations made about how Penn State would help Finney, really tap into his potential and get to the NFL one day. It's been very specific. Penn State has a plan for him. It's been through this before because they liken him to Joey Porter Jr., skill set-wise. So there's kind of a blueprint for that already. That's something that, going back to my conversation with Finney at Baltimore camp, or Under Armour camp, Baltimore, last month, that was something he was really liking and appreciating about Penn State. He felt that State College could be a place where he could go and he could develop, and everything has been lined out for him in a pretty clear manner. So I like where Penn State is standing there. The other one right now, and I don't want to say this caught me by surprise because it didn't. Speaking with sources leading up to the visit, it seemed like Penn State had been in the process of making a move for a little bit now, was Max Granville, the top 24/7 edge rusher from Texas. He is one of, if not the name, on Dion Barnes' board at edge, right? It's just the skill set is elite. The upside is elite. Penn State really loves him. This is another recruitment where development is such a sticking point, and Penn State is really pointing to pedigree with Granville. It did the same with Jose Espinoza, who visited during May. This isn't something that is lost on Penn State when it comes to going after their top edge targets. They lay out all the guys they have put in the league. They lay out what Dion Barnes just accomplished, getting Chop Robinson and Adiza Isaac to the league. And they presented a pretty solid pitch and plan to Granville. As one source put it to me, the notion that Oklahoma or Texas A&M are going to win Granville's recruitment just because it's a strong regional option, that doesn't have legs. Penn State's getting a real look here. I think the Nittany Lions are a huge winner with Granville coming out of the weekend. There's definitely part of me that really can't shake the notion that he's not going to wind up at an Oklahoma or an A&M because it just feels logical. It kind of reminds me of the Jamonta Waller recruitment from last cycle where, was he ever going to leave the South? You could kind of never really shake that feeling, but Penn State's right in it with Granville, man. Big time move with him over the weekend.
So 3 guys right there you feel like Penn State did some really good stuff with over the weekend. Granville's top 200 prospect, big-time edge rusher. Brandon Finney, as you said, a top 24/7 talent. He's the number 25 cornerback nationally in 24/7 sports rankings, the number 4 player from Maryland. And then Lex Cyrus, as you said, the in-state receiver target, someone who we've discussed quite a bit here on the podcast at that position as that board has developed in the 2025 cycle. He's the number 33 overall wide receiver and a 4-star talent in 24/7 sports assessment. So 3 important guys there. We will keep tabs on all of them. And Tyler, looking a little bit further at this group of visitors over the weekend, and we can go a lot of different directions. How about going toward Florida? 3 players from the Sunshine State made their way up to campus. What was Penn State able to accomplish, and what kind of staying power? Because when you talk about official visits that come and go and guys you kind of just forget about in June, there's usually a few guys from the Florida who make their first trip up to Penn State. We don't hear much coming out of it, and then we don't really hear much about them until they commit elsewhere. Are any of these names that our listeners need to keep tabs on moving forward?
I think 2 of the 3, based on the feedback I've received, most definitely are. I want to start with Antonio Branch, the safety from Miami Northwestern High. His visit really blew him away. Now, leading up to his trip to Penn State, which is it was his first time in State College, the Penn State staff dropped in on Branch for a visit during the spring contact period. It was Poindexter. It was defensive coordinator Tom Allen. And that was a trip that Branch seemed to really appreciate because his level of interest in Penn State was already very high. But to see those 2 come down, watch them work out, and catch up with them, that meant a lot to him. And then going into his official visit, he gets to catch up with those 2, as well as Jaywan Sider. And those 2, Sider's work in Florida is well documented at this point in the recruiting trail. He is a force in that region. That has proven to be the case cycle in and cycle out to Penn State's benefit. And I think that's rolling in Penn State's favor when it comes to Branch. Those two have built a bond that goes far beyond the football field. So the relationships in State College, despite the fact that it's still a new place to him, they're there. And also regarding State College as a place itself, Branch was telling me that, growing up in Miami, the hustle and bustle of it, he kind of liked how State College is a little bit out of the way. He could focus on football, really lock in on that. He said he quoted as saying, "It's my kind of thing." So that helped Penn State. I think him getting a look at campus really helped. I'm close on a crystal ball with Branch. I think the only thing preventing me from getting to that point would be he has a Florida official visit coming up later in the month. And the Gators jumped in a little bit further along in his process. And he's been on record saying, Florida has the potential to work its way into his top group, depending on how that visit plays out. So I want to see how it plays out before going to the crystal ball because, hey, look, I wrote it this morning. Florida recruiting is it's Florida recruiting. That's really the only way to put it. There are so many moving parts and things that could change throughout the course of a prospect with any recruit from that region. So Branch looking good right now for Penn State, but we got to see where things go on his future visits. Grayson Littleton's another guy I want to see where things come with future visits for him. Because as me and you were speaking here right now, he's at Clemson for a midweek visit. Then he's going to go to Alabama this upcoming weekend. Then he's going to be at Oklahoma. He's going to be at Iowa to close out the month, and then it's decision mode for him. But that decision is not going to be made until he makes all of his visits. If you think Finney blew up a little bit late, Littleton was even further along in his blow up. It was really mid-February, early March where the offers started coming in and when he started ascending in our rankings as well. He went from a high 3-star prospect from a top 24/7 guy just on the back end of the top 24/7 rankings to a top 100 guy and what felt like the blink of an eye. And I completely understand why because he's a really good prospect and he profiles as a fit at Penn State. Now, are the good vibes coming out of his visit? Is that going to last as he goes along and checks out all these new schools? Got to see. But I think as things stand right now, I think Penn State gave itself a little bit of a lead with Littleton heading into these visits. The third Florida product who visited over the weekend was Ty Jackson, a top 24/7 linebacker who Penn State really likes. And I think that Penn State really did all it could with Jackson to make a strong impression. I just continue to get the sense that he's going to stick in the South somewhere. He's going to be at Georgia this weekend. That's looming as a pretty big visit for him. Florida State's going to get him on campus. I know the Noles have done a really good job with him. So I think Penn State, Jackson's one of the two I'm still, trying to learn more a little bit about here coming out of the weekend. But I just get the sense it's going to be a Southern destination for him in the end. No fault of Penn State's. They've done a good job getting him to campus and, showing him love and making him feel at home. But Georgia or FSU look pretty good for him.
Well, if we've got some longer-term situations brewing with Littleton and with Branch, both of them defensive backs out of the state of Florida, that kind of meshes with what we've seen in recent cycles, right? Last year, Antoine Belgrave Shorter and John Mitchell out of the Jacksonville area coming up at the cornerback position. The cycle before that, for a long time, you had a couple teammates, a potential safety tandem with Conrad Hussey and King Mack committed for a while. Only Mack actually made it to campus, and unfortunately for the Nittany Lions, he only stuck around for a year and a half. But this isn't something new necessarily, and seeing the Nittany Lions do their diligence with defensive backs down in the Sunshine State. There's a few other spots we can go here, Tyler, because it was a pretty long list of visitors. But how about we get into it with some of these defensive linemen? I know that Granville, we spent some time on him, guy who fits that edge rusher spot. We'll see what comes of his highly contentious recruitment. But he wasn't alone in terms of Dion Barnes' focus on campus this past weekend. What do we need to know about the others who made it?
So starting with Yvonne Kamaju, who's a regional guy who's high on Penn State's board. He made it to campus, and things seemed to go well. Kamaju caught up with Doan, and it sounded like he really enjoyed the visit. He learned a lot about both aspects of the school. What I mean by that is on the field and academically. Academically is such a big sticking point for him in his recruitment. I got the chance to catch up with him in Baltimore last month, and he was telling me, him and his family, every visit they make, they're going to be centering on those academics because he's looking at potentially a strong engineering program. He has a pretty clear academic focus in mind in his recruitment. He's going to go on. He's going to continue to make these official visits. Maybe that presents a situation where, numbers-wise, it'll be interesting to follow because Penn State is going to continue to host a lot of targets that it likes on the defensive line. And, if those guys want to get in, where does that leave Yvonne Kamaju? We're going to have to see. I know Penn State likes him. I get the sense Penn State is doing well with him. But with those visits to Duke and Virginia Tech and West Virginia rolling on, I think that, maybe as he gets a little bit later in the process, he might have to make a call for Penn State if that's the place that he wants to be. We'll see. Things are so fluid. You don't know how these official visits are going to play out. You don't know what decisions are going to be made elsewhere with targets on the board. So it's kind of wait and see with Kamaju coming out of the visit, but definitely some good ground covered. Really good ground cover with top 100 edge rusher Cedric Works from Ohio. I wrote this morning there were two guys I was strongly considering a crystal ball pick for coming out of the weekend. The first was Branch, who we already touched on. The second was Works. And if you're listening to this and wondering why Lex Cyrus isn't part of that conversation, really, again, I just want to see what comes of that South Carolina visit. But back to Works. The fit from an on-field perspective, it's most definitely there. His highlight of the visit, he told me, was there was a little bit of downtime for the prospects. They were kind of walking around, touring the facilities, getting a feel for everything. And he looks over, and there are about 10 Penn State defensive linemen working out on their own with no coach in sight, putting in work on their own accord. And that was something that really stood out to him. He told me he feels that Penn State is a fit for him given the gritty and hardworking nature of the program. That's something that he wants to be part of. And I touched on this a little bit before his official visit, but when you look at some of the other suitors right now, it's going to be Cincinnati for him on the official visit from this weekend, Florida the following weekend, then Kentucky to close things out. Now, we all know Vince Marrow at Kentucky. He does some pretty good work in Ohio for the Wildcats. But the fact of the matter is this just feels like a winnable recruitment for Penn State. I'm exploring a couple of different avenues on the intel front before going to the crystal ball on Works, but I'm feeling good about where Penn State is standing coming out of the weekend. He told me he wants to come to a decision before the beginning of his senior season, so it looks like it's going to be a summer call from Works. Right now, I like Penn State to be that call, but again, we're still trying to get a better feel for where exactly things are on multiple fronts with Works. But on his end, definitely Nittany Lions, they're on top.
Top 100 talent out of Ohio will be quite the pickup for this class. Let's stay in the trenches because on the flip side, on the offensive side of this, we still have quite a bit to learn, I think, about how the final few slots of this class are going to be filled. And Malachi Goodman has long been a name that you and I have bounced around here on the podcast. So he was among those who came to campus, one of the two out of the Garden State who are big-time talents, and we can get to the other in just a second as we finish up our review of official visits in Quincy Porter. But what do you think about what they were able to accomplish with Goodman, and where does he fit on their aspirations for this offensive line class?
Well, he's definitely up there on the board. This is another one Penn State wants to get done. They want to get Goodman to be part of this class. The relationships at Penn State with Goodman, they've been pretty good for a while now. He likes Phil Troutland. He likes the overall vibe of the program. He likes the staff. So I think that Penn State continues to sit in a good position for Goodman coming out of this weekend. But this is another recruitment where it's going to drag on a little longer. At least that's what it looks like, based on previous feedback from Goodman, who has said that, his recruitment could go into the fall if he doesn't feel 100% comfortable making a decision one way or the other. A lot of SEC flavor with him. Auburn has come on strong. Georgia's very much in the mix. Bama's in the mix. USC, I know they're not an SEC program. They're a Big Ten program now, but USC in the mix as well. Penn State has done well. I think they're going to continue to do well with Goodman. But at this point, there's really not much sense in calling, where he might be leaning or where things stand. Just along the lines of he's still going through his official visit process and he's still open to a lot and what these upcoming visits have to pitch to him. But I think if you're a Penn State fan, you're evaluating what came of Malachi Goodman's official visit, I think you could think positively of it.
Tyler, getting over to Quincy Porter, because I want to finish with him in terms of this list. And if you didn't hear enough about a particular guy you wanted to hear more about, it's probably over at Lions247.com. 60% off gets you in the door right now with VIP for a deal that we have going through Thursday. So take advantage of that if you want to be in the know on all these official visits and camp action stuff. 60% off through Thursday right now. But Tyler, the other name is Quincy Porter. I know that Brian Doan caught up with him also out of the Garden State. From Malachi Goodman at Paramus Catholic to Bergen Catholic's Quincy Porter. Phenomenal film. Somebody who has that high ranking. I think he's the number 12 player at his position right now. I could see that continue to climb potentially as our rankings get refreshed. Did Penn State do enough to remain a contender moving forward from what you've gathered?
To remain a contender, yes. Porter's been a guy, and again, I just want to reiterate this if you didn't, if you happen to miss last week's episode, he is the top name on Penn State's wide receiver board. Quincy Porter is most wanted at wide receiver. And I think the Nittany Lions have a chance here. I do. Now, do I think they're going to overcome Michigan or Ohio State or maybe even Oklahoma in the end? Not necessarily. I think Michigan's in a pretty good spot. I think Ohio State's done a lot of good work. Now, do I like Penn State's chances of landing Porter better than I did coming out of the winter when he didn't even make it to campus for a junior day? Yes, I 100% do. I like its chances even more in the spring when things are out with him coming out of his late spring visit. I think Penn State has gradually made progress with Quincy Porter. Now, Penn State has made it very clear to him that he can come in and make an early impact and see the field early and be a big-time player in Marcus Hagan's wide receiver room if he takes care of business on his end. That has been laid out to him and reiterated to him very, very clearly. I think that has resonated well. I think that's a big part of the appeal on Porter's end. Now, what's going to come is Michigan-Ohio State visit. I think that's what we need to monitor closely with Quincy Porter moving forward. Penn State has put itself in this mix, though, man. I got to say, I think the staff's done a pretty good job with him, and they definitely helped themselves recently. So, productive official visit. Where do things go from here? It's kind of murky, but I think Penn State, again, can feel good about what it accomplished with Quincy Porter over the weekend. If you haven't noticed, the staff tends to do pretty well with a lot of these guys on official visits.
Yeah, and the tricky part is it's very early in June, and many of them have a lot of miles to log, and a lot of different face-to-face interactions ahead of them. And so you hope that for the ones who are really buzzing on their way out of Happy Valley, that sustains through these next few weekends when they circle back and maybe put everything on the table with mom and dad and their coach and try to come up with a plan for how to finish out the recruitment process. Hey, we're going to turn to Daniel Gallen in just a moment. We're going to talk about some of the stuff we observed on the camp scene on Sunday and some of the freshman additions that had arrived on campus during the weekend as well. But I wanted to pick your brain on a couple topics that came up during camp. And the first is kind of going back to this offensive line class as we see what Phil Troutwine and company do there. Malachi Goodman, certainly a name to know. He's made his official visit. Amari Hills is a player out of Baltimore who camped last weekend on Sunday, and we saw them load him up with a lot of reps, and he was somebody who was hungry for a lot of reps. He was working at left guard for the most part, held up his own end of the bargain, I think, in a lot of that one-on-one work. We didn't see a ton of the what went down between him and Phil Troutwine, maybe away from closed doors in some of those conversations. But he's due back on campus this upcoming weekend for an official visit. And we'll preview that weekend in its totality with you on our second episode of the week. But what do we need to know? Because this is one of those quick emerging names. And he told me coming out of camp that, he's got the Virginia Tech and Maryland official visits upcoming, which Brian Doan had reported on previously. But he's not closing the door on other potential visits. And he's looking at a July commitment timeline. So it feels like a lot needs to be figured out in a hurry. And this is a prospect profile that, quite frankly, I don't have my mind wrapped around it after spending an afternoon on the field with him.
I think there's still some feeling out, and evaluating that needs to go on here from Penn State's end with Hills. That's going to take place during his official visit. He definitely fared well, during the camp. You guys saw it with your own eyes. The feedback from Hills directly has been positive, and it was a solid performance from him, but I think it's very fluid and it's very, to be determined heading into the weekend. That visit is definitely going to occur, and Penn State's going to get a nice long look at Hills while he's on campus this upcoming weekend. But where do things go from there? Again, I think that's a little bit up in the air. It's probably going to be ongoing conversations leading in to his official visit. A couple other schools on the slate afterwards, as you mentioned. So he's open to other suitors. I think if Penn State, does dive in head first and wants to push for Hills, it would be in a pretty good spot. But again, we'll see if that winds up happening.
Yeah, he's somebody checked in at 6'5", 306 pounds. Looks like he moved pretty well at that size right now as well. Some appealing parts of that. But, a lot of those players that you talk about how many guys are going to end up in the class and who's it going to be. And he's part of that fray and an official visit maybe bring some clarity on both ends. Tyler, the other thing I wanted to get to was a few post-camp offers surface. I mean, now we're talking about 2027 prospects. There's 2026 in the spotlight. Even a 2028 gets an offer. What stood out to you? I know you've had some conversations coming out of camp with some of these young men who really are just starting to launch national recruitments, names that we're going to learn a lot more about in the upcoming years. But anything that you think our listeners would really appreciate from what you've gathered in the last 48 hours?
Jace Rhodes is a 2026 cornerback from Virginia who we're going to be talking about a bunch because his first 3 offers have been Penn State, South Carolina, Tennessee. I think that kind of speaks to the quality of prospect we're talking about here. He's an elite track athlete. He's a basketball player, so he's got that 3-sport background that a lot of college coaches love. He worked really well during the one-on-one portion of camp based on feedback, and he traveled to Penn State on Sunday really wanting an offer from the Nittany Lions. It was one that he told me he coveted more than most. So now that he has it, Penn State is high on his list, probably on the top. If we're being frank, I think that the Nittany Lions have set the bar pretty high here early on. Again, it's early on. He's going to get a bunch more offers, so we'll see where things go. But Penn State's really made a strong impression on Rhodes, and he obviously made an impression on the staff during his camp performance. Then in the 2027 class, you got Miles McAfee, the wideout from Archbishop Spalding, who is just lighting it up on the camp circuit. He's done with the camp circuit now, he told me, but Penn State was his last stop, and he got the offer that he wanted. So kudos to him there. Or again, strong showings during one-on-ones, tested really well. And then with Colt Lumpers, he's a 2027 tight end from Lawrenceville School in Jersey. And really, he's still kind of growing in to his frame. I think tight end is probably where he falls at the next level. But he's a big kid, still coming along on the physical development front. And Penn State likes what it saw of him, got an offer. We're going to be talking about him plenty moving forward because he already visited a couple of times before his camp performance. Now that he has that offer, he knows he's going to be back in town.
And by the way, Tyler, you told us coming out of Baltimore that Under Armour camp down there, but we know for ourselves now, Zion Ely, the real deal. Thank you for the heads up on that one. Yes. We enjoyed the visual ourselves though throughout Sunday afternoon.
He's good, man. He's so good. I love that kid. He's a really great guy too. So he's gonna be fun to follow. And we're gonna be talking about him a bunch because he is at the top of that edge rusher board for Penn State in the 2026 class.
We're going to be talking about him in just a moment with Daniel. We'll see you on campus this weekend. I think you're making the trip for the first 7-on-7.
I'm excited.
Yeah, we didn't have you on campus this past Sunday. I should say that. Otherwise, we keep you around for more in-depth stuff with Daniel and I. But we had myself, Daniel, Mark, Grace was out there. But we get you back in town this weekend. We got 7-on-7. We got the Big Man Challenge on Friday. And oh, by the way, we're going to have coaches driving prospects around in golf carts because it's official visit weekend time. So we'll have all that coming your way. But we will get Tyler on for the second episode this week, give a nice preview out to the official visit weekend that lies ahead of us now. But we appreciate you breaking down what just occurred here in Happy Valley.
Thanks, man. Talk soon.
All right. Good stuff from Tyler. Again, really encouraging our listeners out there who have not taken advantage yet. 60% off VIP coverage right now for an entire annual subscription at lions247.com. So not only are you getting this deal for a fantastic, busy month of June with recruiting coverage all over the place, but you're going to stick around for this for preseason camp, for the season itself, for the postseason, the transfer portal stuff, all of it. Get locked in at 60% off through Thursday. That deal will end in just about 2 days. So time to act now. We'll bring in Daniel Gallen now. Again, nice to share the field with him for the first time in a little while. Daniel, we were out at Penn State outdoor practice facilities. We went into the indoor one as well in Holuba Hall. They used them all. There was a lot of prospects on campus. It was a pretty picturesque day in Happy Valley. Didn't get sunburned. So I think it was kind of a win of a day for Penn State, for the prospects out there, and for our coverage at Lions 24/7.
Yeah, it was really good to be back out there. I made the comment where it's like you kind of get halfway through one of these camps and then suddenly you get your feet under you with, where to look, who you're supposed to be listening for, what certain things look like. And once you get that settled in, it's just like riding a bike. Mm-hmm. But my travel schedule this month means I'll miss a couple of these. But I was glad to be out there for the first one.
Yep, and don't worry, if Daniel's not there, we'll still be covered with like 3 or 4 of us. So we will have a good presence at every single one of these camps, including this upcoming weekend. But Daniel, looking back at what we said, why don't we just go with the name I brought up to Tyler when I was saying farewell to him, Zion Ely. This is somebody who's, I'm going to say, from your neck of the woods. I don't know where he lives in relation to where you grew up in Maryland, but I'm going to just put him on you as a local. And he's the number 12 player in the country, one of the more highly rated recruits we've seen out of the state of Maryland in recent recruiting cycles, and someone who absolutely looked the part. I know he's the number 2 ranked edge rusher in America right now. And we heard from Tyler Calvaruso that in terms of the 2026 class, there's no edge rusher higher on the board for Deion Barnes right now. But we saw him getting worked on the interior quite a bit as well, and just absolutely eviscerating offensive linemen, which you'd expect in a one-on-one setting with these kind of athletic, elite athletic traits that he has. But sometimes you hear about a kid and then you see him and you're like, well, he's 15, 16. I can see the traits. Let's see what it looks like in 2 years. He looks like someone who could show up on a Power 4 roster right now and be ready to make some kind of an impact.
No, for sure. I mean, I was really excited to see what he looked like when we could get eyes on him because you see the ranking. We got the feedback from Tyler. We've read the feedback from other evaluators at 24/7 Sports, and so to kind of put all that together and see it ourselves was really really impressive. He's from Joppa, Maryland, Joppatown High School. It's like 25 minutes, I think, from where I grew up. Like in the late 90s, the first football game I remember going to at my future high school, John Carroll, was against Joppatown. And there's not normally players that come out of there. I mean, the Henderson brothers came out of Aberdeen, which is up Route 40 a little bit in the early 2000s, and there's been guys kind of here and there, but have this kind of national prospect coming out of Harford County. Is kind of surprising to me, and that'll be interesting to follow in its own right. But getting to see him out there, I mean, you see the length and you see the physical tools, but the one thing in these camp settings that you can really see is how engaged are they? How are they taking coaching? You can see the frustration or the joy or all the emotions right up close because they don't have helmets on. And Deion Barnes was coaching these guys pretty hard. I felt like going through drills. I mean, I was there for a little bit, and he's really emphasizing these little things. He was making guys go through drills again. I think that he was coaching them kind of how he'd coach his defensive line at Penn State right now. And to watch Zion Ely go through things, I mean, he was one of the guys that, kind of had a very kind of blank expression on his face where he wasn't reacting positively or negatively, but you could tell that he was listening and that, he was taking everything in and being very deliberate going through some of those drills. So that was really, I thought, pretty cool to see and, to be right up close with that. He really stood out. There were a couple guys in that defensive line group that I thought were pretty impressive. But Ely, you could just tell, you could just see it and kind of know that, okay, that's the guy. There's a reason why Penn State is on him. There's a reason why everyone else is going to be on him, and we'll see where that goes.
Florida State, Georgia, Ohio State also among the pack that have not hesitated to put a scholarship offer on the table for Ely. And I'd imagine as tape continues, I mean, we put some stuff on social media. The more reps that are out there for everyone to take a look at, the more that offer list is going to grow. He's already got 20. He's coming up on his junior season this fall, and somebody that Penn State would love to get back here as often as possible as his recruitment expands. He was a lot of fun to watch, and I like that you brought up his deliberate nature because you didn't hear him say, I don't recall him saying anything. I saw him, speaking and conversing with Deion Barnes and Torrance Brown, who's a Penn State defensive line assistant, a former defensive lineman himself here in Happy Valley. But he was just hell bent on getting to his next rep. It felt like as soon as that rep was over, he was just trying to find how quickly you get to his next rep. And you love to see that, especially for a guy who's already established on the recruiting trail. So let's go over from kind of, I think, a guy who, kind of turned heads across the field to a couple more familiar names for us. And we saw them just a couple of weeks ago here at State College High School's field down in downtown State College. Beautiful venue for a camp. This time they were over on their future practice facilities. Beckham Kritza at the quarterback position, Brady O'Hara, and we'll talk about his position in a moment. But let's start with Kritza because he's somebody that I think going in the camp season versus where we are now, I have a very different perspective on who he is as a quarterback prospect, what he might mean to Penn State, and what those inside the Lash building are evaluating and buying into him as a quarterback in this 2025 class.
I think that he's someone that could really have a big year down at Miami Central. I mean, you talk about, finally having stability in terms of moving around all these different high schools and then being at a program like Miami Central that has a lot of talent and that is run, I think, in a pretty, buttoned up way that it's, he's going to be held accountable for everything that happens down there. So, I think that Kritza has the potential to have a really, really big senior year. And we saw, these getting to see him throw, twice in 3 weeks, we really got to see those tools, come together, and you can really see that arm talent that he has. And, he just has such a big arm. There are things that, physically you look at him and, he's still really skinny on that 6'5" frame, but, there's a lot of room to grow there. And I think that with what he's shown, I think that some of the positives are going to maintain, even if he does put on weight and does bulk up. But that arm strength, he makes it look easy. It's just really, really impressive to watch. And he's another one that you talk about the engagement in this kind of camp environment. He came out and during warmups, he was just always around Danny O'Brien. They were talking about things while the rest of the quarterbacks were stretching and everything. And then when the quarterbacks broke up and started to throw, you've got Danny O'Brien right there. You've got Drew Aller right there. You have Andy Kotelnicki, watching them. And it just seemed like, he was listening to everything, trying to apply everything. And, really looked like he wanted to be there and that he was going to take what he learned on Sunday and really spin it forward. So I'm in the same boat as you and Mark that we've talked about that, coming out of these past 3 weeks and getting this much exposure to Beckham Kritza, you understand it a lot more and you kind of see the prospect and you see the potential. And now it's a question of Kritza putting it together and maintaining this through his senior year.
He will be exposed this year, one way or the other. I mean, it's a great opportunity. I've talked about it before. Just speaking with him, face to face and getting a better feel for where he's kind of psychologically at, going back to Miami Central after a very strange journey from last year. He started the season with Miami Central, checked in for like a Hail Mary attempt, and now we can understand why he would check in for a Hail Mary attempt with that arm. But that was against Bishop Gorman. Just to give people a feel for what Miami Central is going to be dealing with on their schedule. I don't know if they play Bishop Gorman again. I haven't looked at the schedule. I should probably have done that before I hopped on here. But I know that they're going to take on a national landscape kind of a competitive environment. And so Miami Central is going to be highly exposed. He's going to be playing alongside Power 4 prospects, but he'll be playing against a bunch of them as well. And when you're at a school like Miami Central, there's such a high expectation where the competitive level, I mean, it is just on a different realm than you can imagine at a high school environment. And that's on a perennial basis. So I think in terms of Penn State, if they're getting him out of that frying pan and his momentum is building down at Miami Central, you're getting a really good spot in this trajectory, because he's somebody that I think because of the lack of game film, the lack of offer development that happened, as an upperclassman, I think some people have kind of cast him aside a little bit when they discuss the arm talents and the quarterback talents. And he didn't make the Elite 11, which is 20 guys out there. But we heard from the Elite 11 staff that they felt like his velocity was on a different level. And I think that's really what stands out. His ability to generate that velocity very quickly is not a super elongated release. I know that it's something that he's working on right now. But it's you watch it, and I probably Drew Aller comes to mind as somebody who could really whip it. But going back to Will Levis, the first time I saw him throw the football was back in I think it was the summer of 2017. They had just lost the commitment from Justin Fields. Everyone knows that was pretty damaging. And you're looking for the next guy. And Will Levis, I don't think he harnessed it too well at that point. And then you can argue, how has he harnessed it in the years to come? Is he still, kind of working on that? But the ball just freaking fired out of his hands. I think he was throwing to guys like Pat Fryermuth, Justin Shorter that evening, and it just stood out. You're like, okay, I get it. Even if he's only going to complete, a certain amount of his passes right now at this level, you can understand what kind of a cannon you're working with. And so I don't know if Beckham Kritza is quite where Will Levis was, because I know Will Levis was getting directly linked to a guy like Jake Cutler from people who were familiar with him down at Vanderbilt and kind of carried over with Penn State. So that's a hell of an arm. But I do know that Kritza generates more velocity on his balls than just about any quarterback prospect we've seen come through as a Penn State commit to these camp settings. And, when you attach that to a 6'5", 198-pound frame that's 15 pounds heavier than it was last fall, your imagination can run wild. And I think you and I have gathered, and I think it's probably something we'll be able to have more conversations with down the road. There is a lot of excitement in terms of that imagination within this Penn State coaching staff right now, and that extends to the recruiting coordinators, and that extends to the coaching staff. And you can kind of just sense there's a little bit of a bubbling excitement brewing with Beckham. I don't know that anyone's going to say, he's the future of the franchise to us, but I think right now you get a sense that they really are kind of increasingly intrigued by the physical and maybe the mental makeup as they learn more about that with Kritza.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark put it the best after Elite 11 when we were talking, and it was just we're starting to see what the staff sees in Beckham Kritza. Granted, there wasn't a lot to go off of when he made his commitment back in November. But yeah, I think that his trajectory and where he takes things is going to be really interesting to follow. Just from a rankings perspective and where he stacks up nationally. I mean, he was up there early in his high school career, and then things happen. You don't have a lot of tape, and everything gets adjusted. But I think that who he was earlier in his career, he's still that quarterback. So it's just a question of doing that consistently and putting it all together. But through seeing him throw in a camp setting 2 weeks in a row, and it was kind of like, or twice in 3 weeks, it was kind of like in Elite 11, a lot of talent there. Ryan Montgomery, Malik Washington, Matt Zollers, you felt like Beckham Kritza stacked up well with those guys. And then you come to this type of environment where Beckham Kritza is kind of like the top dog, and then he looked like it. And that's kind of what you want to see when you're comparing guys and watching guys go through the line. So I came away just very days going into the summer. It's just kind of like when you look at this class, it's kind of like, okay, like the quarterback, we can kind of lock it in that we know what Penn State has there. And just like any prospect, how does that develop over the course of the end of his high school career?
And Chris is due back on campus in another 2 weeks for his official visit. He's been around a bunch. He's excited to build this class. We'll have conversation with him this week. So we'll have some coverage over at Lions247.com about what it meant for him to work with Danny O'Brien, who he's known for a while, but probably more importantly, Andy Kotelnicki, and starting to get to know his personality a bit more. So Beckham Kritza showed again what he's able to do. And we saw something very different, though, this time from Grady O'Hara. Last time I got a look at him in downtown State College a couple of weeks ago at the Elite 11 event, he was running a bunch of routes as a tight end. And that's what he's going to do this year for his high school squad. It's what he did last year. Obviously, a guy who's made an impact at tight end as a blocker at that position. But you watch his highlight film, and he's a guy who is used as a receiver in key moments, and he's going to have opportunities to continue to do that. So he told us, pretty straight to the point, look, I'm a tight end right now for my high school team, and that needs to be my focus. And our conversation last week leading up to the prospect camp was, well, how does the Penn State staff handle that? You can obviously respect the young man for needing to prepare himself for his final season of high school, but you can understand if the Penn State staff wants to make sure everyone's on the same page about what awaits. And we got a really good impression of that, I think, on Sunday afternoon, Daniel, where it was all offensive line for Grady O'Hara. When it came time for one-on-one work, it was left tackle until it was actually all 5 positions before camp wrapped up, but predominantly left tackle. And this was one of those, odyssey kind of camps where you watch a kid have to really put in the work. And we've seen guys come and stack up these camps and get progressively better and better. Caleb Brewer comes to mind last year, a guy that we got to learn a little bit more last month when his offensive line coach was on from Wyomissing and kind of gave us the story on his journey from tight end to offensive tackle at the high school level. Well, it seems like that's going to be the transition for O'Hara. And Frank Leonard, all the way through 15 minutes after the regular camp wrapped up, working with him, it was, I'd imagine, a pretty exhausting day for Grady O'Hara, generally speaking, because they stacked a lot on his plate, and it couldn't have been all that comfortable all throughout.
Yeah, I mean, this is twice in 3 weeks too, like where we've seen Grady O'Hara really, really worked. At that Elite 11 camp, he was catching a lot of passes over the course of that afternoon. But I think that the one caveat is that, like you said, that he's preparing to be a tight end this year. That's his focus at North Catholic. He wants them to win their section in the WPIAL, and kind of show. He wants to bring his team along, be a leader, and that's kind of where his focus is. At the same time, I think Penn State's focus with him probably looks like it's on the line, like we saw on Sunday. He got a lot of work, a lot of reps, a lot of attention, from Phil Troutwine, from Frank Leonard, and from James Franklin too. James Franklin had that golf cart, around the offensive lineman a lot, and was taking a look at what he was seeing from Grady O'Hara. I think the one thing that stands out to me about Grady O'Hara is that he's a really big kid, and he's really, really well built at this stage. And I think that you can kind of project out a little bit, putting some more weight on, getting him in a Penn State strength program. What is that going to do, for him? I think that when you have someone that's making that move in from tight end to being an offensive tackle, there's the adjustment that comes with it in terms of technique and and all of that. But that's what the coaches are for. The coaches are there to help bring you along. That's part of their job too. And so it'll be interesting to see what Brady O'Hara looks like. When I talked to him after Elite 11, I think he said that he thought this was the only camp that he would be able to make it to just because of some scheduling stuff. He's gonna official visit the 14th to the 16th. But he is someone that if he does get back to camp, it'll be really interesting to see how he applies it and how he brings this moving forward. Because that was the other thing, the other impression I came away from talking to him at Elite 11 is that he kind of knows what's being said about him. He's seen what's been tweeted about him. And he wants to prove people wrong. He wants to show what he's all about. And I think that kind of mindset, he seems pretty mature. He knows what's going on, what this is going to take. So it would be cool to see, over the course of like a month or so, what that actually looks like. But we'll see. He's an interesting prospect. It's good to get eyes on him again in kind of a different role, and we'll see what happens the rest of the summer.
And if you want to play at this level, succeed at this level at the offensive line position, you can't fake that. I mean, you have to have genuine passion for it, and we'll learn if Brady O'Hara has that. He's going to have to kind of learn about himself as his. It's like taking a high school wide receiver and making them a tight end, saying you got to start blocking. I mean, all of a sudden you realize you're gonna have to sacrifice if you want to stay in the sport and maybe achieve your best. And as coaches tell you, here's where your ceiling is, trust us. And you can start to see Brady O'Hara, who I pretty much gave a blank slate to in terms of what he was doing in pass protection. I mean, look, he has not had experience in camp settings or in game settings where he's been asked to be a full-time offensive lineman. I know he's blocked at the tight end position plenty. So, there were some hiccup moments, but I'm not going to hold it against him. I think it's as much as he can get here to campus. And I'm sure this is the message from the Penn State staff is, stack these camp appearances. They said a lot about what Brewer was able to do in his development last year leading up to his senior season. I know the staff was really pleased with his progression from early June to the end of July, and then that carried through his senior year. And I recall pretty quickly that one of the first times we brought up Anthony Donka's name to James Franklin last year, when it was pretty clear he was going to be a playable freshman, and he wasn't necessarily a name that everyone knew. James directly said, well, he didn't miss a camp. Like, he was at every single one of our summer prospect camps. So he already had a good feel for Phil. Phil had a good feel for him. You throw in Frank Leonard. It really can buy you a bit of a head start. And then when you talk about Brady O'Hara and what he looks ahead to, he could use a head start. But you understand summer schedules, family schedules, things take you all different directions. What I will say is they just brought a guy in, Egan Boyer, who has a long, long way to go. I mean, I think he was listed at 250 pounds at 6'8". I can get it. If Brady O'Hara is going to get on board with an offensive line future and Phil Troutwine gets on board with that too, and everyone's happy with it, I can understand the specimen here. He's 6'6" right now, about I think he's over 250 pounds at this point, and he's very solidly built. There's a lot of room to fill out there. But again, you've got to buy into this offensive line spot. So Brady O'Hara is a guy that we'll hope to see more in the camp circuit. Hopefully we'll get to speak with him again, because it was a really kind of unique circumstance that we saw play out on Sunday afternoon. But sometimes we see this sort of stuff happen. Every summer it seems someone gets kind of challenged, and James Franklin at the end of this camp said, work at left tackle. Okay, that reps over left guard, center, right guard, right tackle. We've told the stories a bunch about seeing guys like Javen Williams and Anthony Donko and Cooper Cousins go through those kind of scenarios. We saw it here. And again, it couldn't have been comfortable to have to go 5 for 5 in those positions, and it didn't look all that comfortable. But I think this staff is going to learn a lot about Brady O'Hara this summer, and I imagine he's going to learn a lot about himself and what's next in his football career. Daniel, when you look at the other prospects, which there's a ton of, where do you want to begin? Because we have a whole notebook. We have a lot of coverage at lions247.com, but I want to make sure we hit on at least a few of the names that stood out to us, maybe a couple of the storylines that stood out to us. Where do you land once we get beyond who we pointed to with Ely and what he was able to accomplish in the two commits?
Yeah, you guys touched on Amari Hills, who I thought was an impressive looking prospect, and one of those guys where you can see it kind of coming together. There were a couple defensive linemen who stood out to me. I think the two names are Daniel Jennings from Princeton, West Virginia, and then Chris Whitehead from Chesterfield, Virginia, Lloyd Seabird. Those two guys, obviously you're in a group with Zion Ely, so you're playing second fiddle a little bit there. But I thought both of them looked really, really impressive and, showed some different things physically. After practice, we spotted Daniel Jennings with Tom Allen doing a little bit of extra work, doing some drill work. I think that Tyler's had some notes on him on the board about where his positional future might be at the next level. But he's one of those guys that, like I talked about, that seemed to be internalizing every rep, seemed to be going over all of his coaching, all of those different things. I thought that he was someone that I liked. And then Whitehead, 2027 prospect, listed at 6'5", 210. So you can see that frame. It's kind of a big guy. You can tell that he still needs to grow into things a little bit, but there are some athletic skills there. He did one rep where Torrance Brown gave him a high five. That was after he was trying to figure out a couple different things. I thought that those two guys, Jennings and Whitehead, kind of in the region, West Virginia and Virginia, did some nice things in a group where you're with the top dog. And I think that if you can make yourself stand out, I think that's a positive for those two guys.
Anytime a position coach or a coordinator wants a longer look at you after camp, that's typically a good sign about what you did on the day leading up to that point. We'll mention, I think Tyler hit on him when he was bringing up some of those different names that surfaced with offers. But Donald Tabron II out of Detroit Cass Tech, and that's a familiar name for a lot of folks. Familiar school for a lot of folks at this point. Kalen King, Kobe King, one of those schools that perennially is going to have Power 4 talent there. So when you're a young quarterback at that program, you're not going to go into hiding. And he certainly is out and about now. He's got a bunch of offers. Penn State becoming his fourth already. We're talking about a 2028 recruit, so an incoming freshman quarterback. But he was already one of the bigger, longer figures when you just saw the lineup. He wasn't quite long like Beckham Kritza, but I think he could maybe get there when he's not 13 or 14 or however he is right now. They don't put out these offers to quarterbacks going in their freshman year very often. And this is a guy who's probably going to collect a bunch before he actually takes his first full-fledged varsity season snaps.
Yeah, I really liked what I saw from him. I mean, there's kind of the thing when you're dealing with an incoming freshman, there's still some growing to do. And you can see that long frame and you can see that, okay, the coordination, should come together eventually. But I was just really impressed. I thought he threw a really, really nice ball. He and Danny O'Brien had a really good rapport during one-on-one drills. It looked like they had a pretty quick little handshake between the two of them after Tabron would make a play downfield. So yeah, that was someone that, coming in, you see class of 2028 with, Kentucky, Maryland, Marshall, you're kind of like, all right, what's this going to look like? That if he's going to Cass Tech and he has a chance to play quarterback for them, there's probably something there. And so to see that on the practice field, I was really, really impressed with that. Long way to go. I mean, man, December 2027 for signing. Can't sign until then, so a lot can happen. But it's kind of to have that name on the radar now. I think that he's someone that a lot of people are going to find out about over these next couple of years.
Yeah, I thought the tight end group was pretty good overall. You saw a couple offers come out of there. I think you'll see some interest generated, but overall, it was a fun camp to cover, and it's one that will continue to kind of have some trickle out coverage coming out of it in the days ahead, and then we'll get a chance to evaluate more prospects. On Friday, there's going to be the first 7-on-7 tournament of the summer. They're having 3 of them this month, which is one more than usual. And then there's also, during the same time, you get the big man challenge. So you got defensive, offensive linemen putting in work on the practice fields, and then on the intramural fields, teams from all over the region, sometimes teams from well out of the region, playing 7-on-7 ball. So a lot of ground to cover. We will do that. And then Sunday, another prospect camp, very much tailored like the one we saw this past Sunday, where it's going to be kind of those traditional positional drills, working its way to more competitive periods. Penn State will get a chance to collect all that physical testing. So we're out and about. Check us out at Lions247.com during those camps, because we will be doing live updates Daniel, from potential future on the radar guys in 2028 to ones that we're just going to start to get acclimated to here in 2024, 3 more freshmen checking in. This class is almost complete now from the 2024 recruiting cycle. A big chunk of them, I think it was 16 was the number, showed up for January enrollment. Many of them were able to log a bunch of spring practices, participate in winter conditioning. We saw a group of 4 get to campus in May, and now a trio, including 2 teammates from Wisconsin and a 4-star defensive back from Maryland. And Daniel, we'll start with the guy who was on this podcast with us just a few days ago as he was getting ready to pack his bags and come to Penn State. Donnie Harbor. He came to campus with his teammate Corey Smith, who's at the running back spot. He's a 4-star. Donnie Harbor, a high 3-star prospect in our 24/7 sports evaluation, the number 41 interior offensive lineman. Somebody who checks into campus around 6'3", 315, 320 pounds. And as he told us on the podcast, understands the realities of what it looks like for a true freshman lineman. He wants to learn. He wants to work on his body. And he's somebody that I think a lot of pieces in place for us to pop our head in where he's at next spring and be pleasantly impressed by where he's come.
Yeah, he strikes me as one of those linemen who comes in and is kind of going to go behind the curtain. And then at some point in the spring or next summer, he'll come out from behind the curtain, and we'll see what a year in this Penn State program can do for a player, especially on the offensive line. I think that you look at that spot, the interior offensive line. I mean, I don't think the way that they've built the depth, none of the linemen who are coming in, you look at it and say, you're going to need to play right away. Obviously, knock on wood, things can change, but I think that Harbor and the rest of this class, they're just in such a nice position on the line to sit and learn and wait.
Except for one.
Except for Cooper Cousins, obviously. I mean, at this point, we were joking about it at camp. Like, it was weird not seeing him out there, out of camp. And
I know he was literally probably like 10 for 10 the last couple summers, how many of these camps. And he was always just such a competitor, awesome to follow. And so I guess none of us were really all that surprised when he picked up where he left off on the practice field this spring.
Yeah, he's like a sophomore in my head at this point. Yeah, but I think Harbor, he's going to come in, he's going to get to acclimate, get to learn, and I think that you like some of the tools that you see out of him, and you just really like that attitude. I think that that's really big, especially when you're going to have to be patient, and coming in and knowing that I think is big for someone like Harbor.
Yeah, so Harbor comes to campus. He was a 3-time first-team All-State selection up there at Memorial Catholic in Wisconsin. And Corey Smith joins him. He's followed plenty of blocks over the years behind Donnie Harbor. And now Smith suddenly finds himself in a spot with London Montgomery gone where throw his hat in the ring as one of those competitors for the RB3. I think he's gonna have a lot of ground to make up. I wouldn't make him the betting favorite, and I would peg him behind the other 2 pretty obviously right now. The other 2 being Quentin Martin, who the other freshman who came to campus in January, is more physically advanced at this stage than Corey Smith, who I think has some work to do in building up that Big Ten body. And then, of course, Cam Wallace, who really did himself some favors during the spring when Quentin Martin wasn't always available. Cam Wallace was, and Cam Wallace was steadily impactful, and we got a nice look at him during the blue-white game when both those guys showed up. So compelling here because not just an RB3 conversation, but what happens after Nick Singleton and Katron Allen conversation, and anything you can do for yourself in 2024 for any of these young running backs could really set you up for a big 2025. What do you make of Smith? Because he's somebody who also got to multiple camps, worked with Jaywan Sider, and we had the luxury of seeing him work side by side on a couple occasions with Quentin Martin, which is always helpful when you want to compare and contrast 2 running backs in the same class.
Yeah, I think that Smith, like you said, definitely has some ground to make up. But at the same time, we've seen summer enrollees make up ground before and put themselves in position to contribute. I think that you look at running back, and like we've said, Penn State has been, I think, pretty lucky these past 2 years when it comes to the overall health of that room. And so, the more bodies you can have in there who are ready, I think the better in case something doesn't, something goes wrong. Knock on wood, it doesn't. But yeah, I mean, thinking about Corey Smith from what we saw at camp last year, we saw a guy who could catch the ball I thought, pretty well. I thought he was able to do some really interesting things as a receiver. I think at Catholic Memorial, they used him in some interesting ways to get him into space. It's kind of similar to, he's a different body type from Quentin Martin, but they were still they were used a little bit differently.
The
And had
dual threat running backs. I mean, I think
yes,
you need to be a triple threat to play for Penn State because you got to be able to block linebackers and defensive ends. But I think it's fair to say that and it's been publicly stated by James Franklin that they're very high on the receiving skills that both these freshman running back have in their arsenal.
exactly. And I think that that's something that, we've seen Nick Singleton improve that. We've seen Katron Allen be competent in that. And I think that that's an aspect that we could see a little bit more from Andy Kotelnicki in his offense as he tries to get these guys in the space and use them in different ways. So I think that Corey Smith is coming into a good situation. I think that the number one thing for him is to be healthy and be ready, so that he can take advantage of the summer, take advantage of early practices in August, and we'll see where things come out on the other side. I think that with those three running backs behind Singleton and Allen, they're all a little bit different. They're all kind of in different stages, but they all have potential to be exciting players and unique players when all is said and done.
Smith missed some time as a senior, but did get back and came back in a big way, as Donnie Harbor alluded to on our podcast conversation last week. Came back, had some big performances with the postseason looming. Somebody who had a couple 1,000-yard campaigns as a sophomore and junior earlier before that injury. So DeJuan Lane is the third of this group. He's at the safety position, somebody who's bringing size there. And there's been conversation on this podcast and in the past about, is he going to be there long term? He does bring the speed. He's shown that. The track marks reflect that as well. He's going to have staying power in the secondary. He's not somebody that we're waiting to grow up and play linebacker all of a sudden. And I think that him and Vabu Torre, who got to campus in January at the safety spot, and I thought really handled himself pretty well in the spotlight in the blue-white game, and maybe enters a little bit more of a spotlight, as does DeJuan Lane, because of King Mac's departure and what he probably meant for the future at the safety spot. DeJuan Lane, I think, really has those ball hawk-ish skills that you'd love to see, kind of the center fielder, safety, not as afraid to hit. He's going to be physical. He'll be able to bring down ball carriers. But I think what Vabu Torre does so well is he'll slice and dice you in the alley. And he's somebody who's going to come up and lay down that lumber with authority. So these are complementary pieces that they bring at the safety spot. We got a pretty decent look at Vabu during the spring, and now DeJuan Lane's going to get his chance. But if you got to be realistic in this room, they like what Lamont Payne brings there after spending his first year at cornerback. Obviously, Tyrese Mills, we're not quite sure how he factors in and what the lion role could mean for this room as well. But Takari Nelson at safety, long, big, rangy, somebody that does kind of look like he could grow up into a linebacker still. And Daniel, of course, you've got the trio of established players who we think are going to be part of the primary 11 for Penn State's defense most of the time. Zakee Wheatley, KJ Winston, and Jalen Reed.
Yeah, I think, I'll say that Lane is probably one of the guys in this class that I know the least about. And we talked about it in terms of the way that he handled his recruitment. Was, pretty close to the vest, didn't talk too much. I watched his tape and, kept track of things during his senior year at Gilman, but, he doesn't come in with maybe kind of like the same, gravitas from all that media exposure that other guys might. But yeah, I think that he is really intriguing, and he's at a position in safety and in the defensive backfield where you can burn that red shirt. You can find your way to special teams, get on the kick coverage unit. He had a really strong showing in the 100 meters in the MIAA championships down in Baltimore. It's a tough league, and I think that to have that kind of speed and to show it, I think that you can kind of see in your head how that might translate to kick coverage or punt coverage or something along those lines. And that's often where we've seen safeties and cornerbacks get on the field early in their careers. So I think that Lane is I'm very curious to see what he looks like. I'm excited to see what he looks like. I liked what you said about him and Torre being very complementary pieces and kind of their builds and playing styles a little bit. And so we'll see. I mean, King Mac leaving, I think that opens things up a little bit At the same time, though, Lamont Payne had a strong spring, and I think we're all kind of waiting to see what Dakari Nelson can do with a bigger role. He was someone that, a year ago this time, we were talking about as someone that we were super, super excited about. So what does he do with his opportunities? It's a crowded room, but we've seen Anthony Poindexter develop guys. We've seen him get players onto the field early in their careers. And so I'm going to be curious to see how this plays out. But, I like Lane's, kind of prospect profile. I think that he might, he probably can carry that sleeper designation a little bit among this class, but we'll see what it looks like when he gets out there. But I'm excited for what that looks like.
Anthony Poindexter has done quite a job with that safety room, bringing the talent in, then at the back end, sending them off to the league and getting them some Big Ten accolades along the way, maybe some All-American accolades, as we've seen in the past, and could happen again here in 2024. So those are the three freshmen who are here. There's two more guys getting to campus, and then Kenny Wosley and Tysier Denmark out of Imhotep Institute in Philadelphia, expecting them here on campus later in June. But those guys are the last two, and that's it. So Penn State's very close, and that's what you like to hear. Once you get in June, that there's not a lot of open-ended conversations in the recruiting class still, as it becomes your freshman class, and just about everybody in the nest at this point. In fact, as we were working our way out of Haluba Hall on Sunday evening after we wrapped up camp coverage, there was Donnie Harbor in the flesh. I had just spoken to him 3 or 4 days earlier on our call for the podcast, and he was up in Wisconsin, and I was here on campus. And all of a sudden now he's running in the team facility. It looked like him, Lane, and Smith both getting underway with some early conditioning work as Chuck Losey was observing. And, Chuck Losey always eager to get these freshmen on campus and start to get to work with them. One thing that I really didn't want to go without mentioning here on the podcast is a fantastic annual event that you were out covering along with Mark Brennan. That is the Coaches versus Cancer. They have the golf event here in Happy Valley every year. Mike Rhodes, head coach here at Penn State, year number 2, who we actually saw at Penn State's football camp on Sunday. He was front and center as the head coach of the program always is at this event. And so, Daniel, what did you take away from Mike Rhodes on the impact of Coaches versus Cancer and what it's kind of been as a staple of the community here? And additionally, how do you think in year 2 he is a little bit more comfortable perhaps here on campus? He certainly seemed that way when we saw him chatting with a bunch of folks and just moseying on from different fields like us on Sunday.
Yeah, Coaches versus Cancer it's a really cool event. To have in the community. It's the golf tournament. There's some other events that go into it as well, but you get a whole bunch of Penn State luminaries to come back, both from within the basketball program and outside of it. I think Christian Hackenberg has been a staple at it these past couple of years, and the Penn State chapter of Coaches versus Cancer is regarded as one of the top fundraising groups in that whole organization. And so it's a good way for someone like Mike Rhodes to connect with the community, to raise money for a good cause, but also connect your program to the fan base and to the people that are going to be in the stands at the Bryce Jordan Center, and maybe meet some more people who are now going to want to come to the Bryce Jordan Center. And Rhodes said that it's an awesome cause. It's an awesome event. He loves doing it. He loves being there. As for the team moving forward, you got 5 guys coming back, 4 freshmen coming in, 4 transfers coming in. Rhodes said that everyone should be on campus by June 16th. And then they'll get going with their off-season conditioning program. But he seems really excited about things. I think the big thing, and this goes for kind of any second year coach in kind of this new era of college basketball and college athletics in general, where when you get there, you kind of got to build the roster. You're plugging holes however you can. You're looking, working all these different connections to get people in the door. Now in year 2, you can go into the portal and you have that proof of concept that you can show guys and say, this is how we want to do things. This is how you fit. This is the role that you're going to have. And I think that they really did that. Rhodes sounds really, really excited about a bunch of different guys on this team. Mark Brennan has a nice little piece about Kache Enze, the Xavier transfer, who was coached at the George School by Ben Luber, a Penn State alum. There's some really good feedback on Enze in there. I think that he's someone who can come in and have an early impact. And it's just one of those things where the team is going to look different this year. One area is that the big men down low, Kudus Wahab came along really, really well last year, but he was a guy that you kind of knew what you were going to get out of him. You kind of knew what he could do. But in the way that Rhodes was talking about Enze, Yannick Niederhauser, who transferred in from Northern Illinois, and Miles Goodman, the incoming freshman who finished as a top 100 recruit in 24/7 Sports' rankings. He's really excited about that trio and how they can do things a little bit differently. And so this team is going to look a little bit different this year. And so I think that's just the big takeaway, is that they were able to get this roster together, pretty quickly compared to last year, set it, and then they're good to go. They kind of know what they're dealing with and how they want things to go this summer and beyond.
Appreciate the coverage, Daniel. You can find it all at lions247.com as well. We'll hear from you soon. Take care, man.
Thanks, Tyler.
Good stuff from both my lions247.com colleagues who joined us on the show today. Daniel Gallen, before him, Tyler Calvaruso. Plenty more content from the camp circuit, from the official visit weekends, from Coaches versus Cancer, and that basketball coverage over at lions247.com. We also have some team-related content that'll be popping up this week as we continue to focus in on this roster. We are 88 days away from kickoff at West Virginia on August 31st. May seem like a long way now, but I know that clock is ticking pretty fast in the Lash building, day by day. So we'll talk to you soon right here at the Lions 24/7 podcast. In the meantime, go follow our coverage and get 60% off VIP access right now at lions247.com. I'm Tyler Donahue. Take care.